I've come into our studio today, which as you can see is still a work in progress, and I want to do some scientific drone testing. So first things first, let's get our science lights on. Better. So, a recently established fact in drone science is that sharpness is the only thing that matters in this whole world. So with that in mind, we're going to compare a Mavic 2 Pro with a pair of scissors, with a hammer, and with a knife, and we'll see which is sharper and therefore which is better. Here's what I reckon has happened. DJI has worked its socks off to squeeze a 10-bit camera into this drone at the expense of maybe two things. First of all, a little bit of barrel distortion, which is a little bit of a pain because it's one extra step you have to correct in post, but it's really not that much of an issue. And having used this for quite some time now, I can say that 90% of the shots you would never notice this barrel distortion on them. Anyway, second of all, this notion that we have lost sharpness in the camera. Now, I don't want to get into it here because I've discussed it in another video, but we're talking about optical sharpness versus digital sharpness. This is an optically sharp lens, there's no question about that. What the D-Log profile does is it strips some of the digital sharpness off it, so when you're sitting there comparing an unsharpened, clean image, if you like, with a digitally sharpened Phantom 4 Pro image, the Phantom 4 Pro is going to look sharper. To my eye, it doesn't actually look better, but it looks sharper and hence blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I want to change the conversation. I don't want to focus on that. I want to talk about color. This has 10-bit color. Yay, loads of colors, basquillions of colors, but 8-bit gives me 16 million colors and the human eye can only see 10 million colors, so that sounds absolutely pointless. Let's just put that aside and keep going on about sharpness. It's not sharp, it's rubbish. My knife is sharper than a Mavic 2 Pro. Get me a sharper drone. This one's not sharp enough. Right, put your hand up if you have seen the benefit of the 10-bit color that you get on this H.265 codec shooting 10-bit D-Log M. Stick your hand up in there. I'm not seeing many hands, and this is where the issue lies. I'm going to show you why 10-bit color is great, why you want it, why it's better than 8-bit color, and why we should be focused on that as a creative helpful tool within our drone rather than banging on about a lack of digital sharpness. Let me jump straight to the conclusion here. 10-bit color is easier to correct and grade than 8-bit color. If I give you two identical video files, play them on the screen, one's 10-bit, one is 8-bit, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. That's not what it's all about. You can't see the difference. 10-bit and 8-bit capture more colors than the human eye can see, so that's irrelevant. And your monitor is 8-bit in all likelihood. Who cares? Irrelevant. If, however, I give you two identical underexposed clips, but one is 8-bit, and one is 10-bit. And I ask you to color correct those, to raise the exposure, to pull out some detail in the midtones and the shadows so that we have a balanced exposure, because there was either a mistake in terms of shooting on the day, you filmed it underexposed by mistake, or you did it deliberately to retain some detail in the clouds or in the froth on the tops of the waves or in the bride's white dress. You've underexposed your image. If I get you to color correct the 8-bit versus the 10-bit, then you will see a difference. You will wonder, how did I ever get by with 8-bit when you start color correcting 10-bit? It really is quite amazing in comparison. And if you take the Mavic 2 Pro as an example, combine that 10-bit color with the 1-inch sensor and the performance that that gives, and you have a far, far, far superior camera to certainly any Mavic that has come before. And for that reason, we should focus on 10-bit color and not digital sharpness. By way of a very quick graphical depiction of what's going on when we talk about 10-bit versus 8-bit, what we have here is two pieces of very dark footage where the exposure has been increased massively past the point at which you would ever realistically do it in a color correction. But I wanted to test to see just how much information had been retained in the shadows. Now, if you look at the 8-bit to begin with, look at all those spikes and look at all the gaps in the spikes. That's a loss of information. There's no color information in there. We're really struggling now for data, for color depth, when we increase the exposure as much as we have here. By contrast, look at the 10-bit. The situation's not perfect, far from it, but you can see that those gaps are basically filled and we have a fairly smooth parabola, I suppose you could call it, on the histogram there, showing that there is still some information there. And when you're zoomed in 5000% here like you are, it is completely abstract. But when you're doing it for real, that's why you see a practical benefit of 10-bit versus 8-bit. In terms of that practical benefit, check out this example here. Right, the Mavic 2 Pro comes down, it starts to tilt up. We see the couple, obviously, now we see the background. We see those shafts of light coming down, the mountain, the location. It looks absolutely fantastic. Really cool storytelling shots. If you want to get into that kind of stuff, do check out our 8-hour masterclass. There's a link in the description below. And we talk about the storytelling and filmmaking aspects of drone cinematography. It's a really enjoyable course, so do check that out. Anyway, I want to demonstrate where 10-bit color helped us here. Let's switch off all the effects and see the starting point. Oh my goodness, look at that. Absolutely horrendous. How do we work with that? Well, the issue is we had this blown out sky here and I wanted to get some kind of exposure on the couple without destroying all the detail in the sky. So I had to find some kind of halfway house, and it wasn't perfect in all honesty, but that was the judgment I made on the day. I'll switch all these effects off and you can see what I've done one by one to bring this back. First of all, we added our custom LUT. It's the Mavic 2 Pro Shade D-Log LUT. We'll be releasing some of those soon, so we won't get into that here. But we put that back on and that brings the colours back. It doesn't do anything with the exposure or the contrast, but it gives us the colours that we want to see. Then I added a mask here at the bottom, which I can demonstrate here. I put a localised colour correction on here because I wanted to change the exposure of the ground, but not the sky. So I did that with a mask. I wanted to strengthen that look a bit further with a second mask that I put just on the couple, and if I switch that on and off, you can see the effect that that's had. It's just added a bit more pop with the couple. Almost looks like those shafts of light are coming down on them, even though they're not. We know they're standing in the shade. And then finally I added a vignette just to bring a little bit more focus onto the couple. The couple are, at the end of the day, the subject. All of this stuff around them, beautiful though it is scene setting, and you don't want it to be too much of a distraction. The couple at the end of the day are the main story here. So there you have it, pretty intense change of colours from this ungraded D-Log image to the final image here. But the point is, if you try and do this with either a lower quality camera or certainly with an 8-bit camera, you're going to really encounter some trouble when you start messing about with the exposures to this degree, because you're going to introduce tons of noise and artifacts into the image. And I was able to do this without destroying the image, and that is the benefit of 10-bit. The photography comparison is shooting JPEG versus RAW. When you edit a RAW photo for the first time, you just can't believe the amount of information that's there. You can make such a hash of taking that photo. You can overexpose it, underexpose it. White balance can be all over the place, and you can fix it because the amount of luminance information that's contained in there and the amount of color, chroma information that's contained in there is absolutely huge. You're dealing with up to 16-bit color depth. It's crazy, but as a consequence, the file sizes are huge. Now, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about getting one step closer. We have 10-bit color versus 8-bit color, so kind of along the spectrum, getting you all the way up to uncompressed raw data, we're doing pretty well. In practical terms, how it helps us is this notion of deliberately underexposing to preserve detail in highlights, knowing that you can comfortably bring back your exposure in post in those midtones only, whilst retaining the detail in the highlights. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you, then this whole issue of 10-bit color depth, oh, it's nice to have it, loads of colors, but you don't really understand it, and as a consequence, I think that's why the conversation has focused on sharpness, which we all understand. It's all pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, if you're not quite at the stage where all of this really matters to you, or when you're out flying, the last thing you're worrying about is whether you're intelligently underexposing the shot a little bit, you need to get back to basics. You need to see our 8-hour drone cinematography masterclass. We take you from drone owner to drone pilot to drone cinematographer in a cinematic, educational and entertaining way. So there's a lot of moving parts here. It's a long journey to become really proficient, but it's everything that is involved can be taught and can be learnt. Creativity, I firmly believe, can actually be learnt. Yes, you know, if you're taking the extremes, the geniuses of this world in various creative enterprises, fine, they're gifted. I certainly don't fall into that category. Everything that I know or put into practice has been learnt. Anyway, it's a big topic. I'll leave it at that for now. I didn't want to get too technical into all of this. I just wanted you to understand the concepts and just try and change this conversation a little bit about drones and how we assess whether they're any good or not. Keep in touch, check out our Instagram page. We've got a great wee following on Instagram, building that, which posts some different photos and different content there. It's quite good. And until next time, happy flying.